best. Civil rights activists said that 2 trophies convicted of murdering Stephen Lawrence should not distract political leaders from the wider problem of racism in the UK. So he's saying that the UK is racist, and they need to deal with that. But they didn't criticise him for that. Why didn't they say that was a racist statement he made? I'm going to talk about racism in a minute. This is Genghis Khan. The greatest happiness is to scatter your enemy, to drive him before you, to see his cities reduced to ashes, to see those who love him shuddered in tears, and to gather into your bosom his wife and his daughters. Genghis Khan. Do you think they've done that to you? Huh? That's some cold talk. But who's this dude? Anyone know where the statue is? Huh? This statue is in Bristol. This guy's Bristol, yeah? This guy's called Edward Colston. The profits from slavery were not only used to purchase properties and seats in Parliament, it also served to buy public sympathy in the form of good works and acts of baronial largesses. Baronials are like the barons, yeah? In Bristol, the name of Edward Colston is still associated with the schools and the churches that benefited from his donation, rather than with the business of slavery from which he made his fortune. Roads are named after him, and his statue stands on one of the many streets that bear his name. Fortunes made in the Caribbean were central to the creation of the idea of the 18th century English country gentleman. Do they teach you this in your school? Most people don't even know who this dude is, and we will still walk into his church in Bristol and not even know that was built after the backs of your ancestors. This is how dumb we are. Let's go into it and see what the history was. This is a picture of the ports in Bristol and Liverpool. They expanded so quick with slavery, because once Britain got into slavery, I mean, here we are, the city's wealth between, let me start from here. Increasing British shipping and commerce of all kinds, that slavery was central to this expansion is demonstrated by the rapid development of the docks in Bristol and Liverpool. Carving of African heads on elephant decorated Liverpool Town Hall in clear reference to the source of the city's wealth between 1787 and 1807. What's that got to do with the Windrush? If you came over here in the Windrush, this is 1787 and 1807. You came on here in fucking slave ships. A lot of the time people start talking about American slavery, but your slavery was right here. Do you understand what I'm saying? Your slavery was right here. Let's go on to read. The memorial at St. George's Quarry is the only monument in Britain to the victim of the slave trade. The popular focus on Bristol and Liverpool distracts us from the fact that smaller ports also profited. Almost 15,000 slaves were carried in ships sailing from Whitehaven. More than 30,000 were carried by ships from Lancaster, Glasgow and Plymouth. Also had a significant trading people. Kevin Dalton Memorial of the enslaved African at St. George's Quarry, Lancaster docks remain the only monument in Britain to the victim of slave trades. No wonder you can't know yourself, because all of this history, they don't teach it to you in school. You don't know it, and every minute they keep repeating this program, the Windrush, to make you feel like that's when you actually came over here. But you actually came over here on slave ships. This was actually going on in London as well, so don't think it was just Bristol and Liverpool. Yeah? And if you had such fine arts, why would you use African arts to decorate your town hall? I'm not talking about local people that you see on the road that was involved with this. I'm talking about people who were high status at the time, right? By the 1790s, there was 4,800 enslaved people in British Caribbean colonies. It is estimated that 11 to 12 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic into slavery. Many more had died during capture and transportation. In the first third of the 18th century, Britain's involvement in the slave trade grew enormously during the 1720s. Nearly 200 enslaved Africans were transported across the Atlantic in British ships. The Middle Passage across the Atlantic Ocean was brutal. Enslaved Africans were packed into tight space and given barely enough food and water to stay alive. Now, I'm going to go into this a bit more down in the month where I'm going to do a class on slavery. Yeah? I'm only trying to show you what racism really is. And this is what they need to talk about when they talk about racism. When you watch the movie Bermuda Triangle, it was your ancestors that were disappearing in the sea. The Atlantic slave trade is the triangle. Rum and goods to Africa, sugar to New England, slaves to the Americas. This were you, they were transporting you. All of these things you should be teaching in your schools. Your kids need to know this. Because Jews will tell you that when you ask the Jews, why do you keep talking about the Holocaust? What do they say? If we don't teach our children, history will repeat itself. How comes we are not allowed to talk about our history? It's not even mentioned in your schools about what Britain's role was in the slave trade. They like to keep this quiet so you remain dumb. And if your children don't know this, then they're not buried in no roots. They won't know anything that happened. And eventually when they come to know and find out that you didn't teach them it, they're going to start looking at you. Why didn't you teach me these things when I was younger? Do you understand? Because if it happens again, they wouldn't even know it happened before. Let's look at this. Stately homes. Hereward House, Leeds. When looking for traces of the slave trade, follow the money. Will inevitably lead you to the most, what? Visible signpost of the wealth this business generated. The Great Country House. The discovery that an individual was a shareholder in the Royal African Company in the 17th century is usually an indicator that a significant portion of that family's wealth originated from the slave trade. So all of these houses that you see, stately homes, they were built off your backs. Do you understand? And what they call this house? Hereward House. Hereward is a goddess. Hera, or Hera. You can read about her in the mythologies. With Eros and Venus. If you read that, I mean, like I said, if you look in this book here, under H, she's in there. No, I won't go into that now, so I'll move on a bit quick. The origin and history, races. 1932 as a noun, 1983 as an objective from the race. Racism is first attested in 1936 from France, originally in the context of Nazi theories, but they replaced earlier words racialism, 1907, racialist, 1917, both often used at first in Bristol or South African context. Example of racist. The racism that was the basis of apartheid. Was the racist of what? Apartheid. So what's that got to do with us? They keep calling us racist. Hitler's declaration of his belief in a master race was an indicator that the inherent racism of the Nazi movement. What's the difference from Hitler and what they've done to you? If Hitler believed in a superior race, didn't I just read to you earlier when I said to you that Europeans used to see themselves above you? The only way they can tax you is to class you less than a human. Did you know that? How much do you know that? Vatican, the root word is vat. And I will say to you, go and do your homework. Go and look up the word tax. And look at the words that's related to that.
Tangible.
Sorry?
I looked it up. Tangible.
And goes deeper into it. Yeah. Right? Look up the words that are associated with those words. Yeah? So when I look at the Vatican, it really, if you break it down, it just means vat, I, can. You understand? That's who you're paying your money to. The recording career of the Hendersons band was believed due partly to the racism of booking agencies that didn't take on black acts until the mid-30s, when Henderson's career was on the wane. So only when their career was on the wane did they allow you to come into their places. Do you know in the early 60s in this country, you could not walk into a church beside them? There will be 2 bouncers standing up outside the church, and they'll be blocking you from coming in the church. So one has to ask, well, what kind of Jesus were they worshipping at that time? I'm not talking about 100 years ago, I'm just talking about a couple of years ago. You could not go into church and worship beside them. All right, let me just get through this reading too quick, because I don't want to kill you up with too much reading, because I know what your minds are like. Example of this first definition about in the United States. Blacks were not only considered inferior to whites, but regarded as property instead of human beings. You get that? So, what different is this from what Hitler was saying? What I've just showed you the definition. They are saying that we were inferior to them. So that means this is racism, right? If you don't have no power, then how can you class yourself as being racist? We have to stop using these words unless we don't understand what they mean. So it's quick for us to just go, oh, that was racist, isn't it? Understand what it means first before you use it. In 1994, I'm not talking 100 years ago, in 1994, a book called The Bell Curve posits that the genetics were to blame for why African Americans traditionally score lower on their intelligence tests than whites. The book was attacked by everyone from New York Times columnist Bob Herbert, who argued that social factors were responsible for the differential, to Stephen Jaycood, who argued that the author made conclusions unsupported by scientific research. In 2007, Nobel Prize winner, geneticist James Watson, ignites similar controversy when he suggested that blacks were less intelligent than white. This is a Nobel Prize winner that's saying that. How much people jumped on his back when he made that statement? This came on the news once. This black guy spoke about it once. It was on for about 5 minutes, then it was finished. No text from no black people to say, right, did you hear that? When they're making their statements, nobody says anything. I don't hear from no one. So they can go around saying they are more superior than you, and because of that, they made you into a person, so they can tax you. This is why you see a lot of people now jumping up and talking about the Black's Law Dictionary. But what happened is, white people start reading it, and they start saying, hold on a minute, they're taxing us like how they're taxing these niggers. That's why you see them so angry now. That's why they're so angry now, because they're saying, hold on, the birth paper is related to us as well. This is what I was saying to you about Sir Blackstone's commentary on the laws of England, because they feel like we've lost our liberty. Their laws allowed them to do certain things, and they can get away with it. Your laws doesn't allow that, because you are governed by the laws of these books. Do you understand? Let me go on. But yet still, it says, to be sold on Thursday the 3rd day. This is an old document. 94 Prime Health for Negroes, consisting of what? 39 men, 15 boys, 24 women, and 16 girls. I can guarantee you this. Don't think that these women just came over. All of them were sexually abused on the ship. They were sexually abusing the man, the woman, and the kids. They didn't give a shit who they were sleeping with. The Atlantic slave trade, also known as the transatlantic slave trade, referred to the trade in slaves that took place across the Atlantic Ocean. From the 16th through to the 19th century, that vast majority of slaves involved the Atlantic slave trade. Africans from the central and western parts of the continent who were sold by African slave dealers, because they were Africans actually selling other Africans into slavery. A matter of fact, the African company that I just spoke to you about, you know what they were doing at the time? They were just making up laws so they could sell you to the slave ship. Anything. If you stole a box of oranges, right, that's a crime. You're on the slave ship. This is what they were doing back then. The ships were in order to upscale the Portuguese and the British and the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the what? So everybody was involved in your demise.